Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Finding the Words, the podcast devoted to text-based art and artists. My name is Kenneth A. Kinsley, and I hope to shine a light on some of the best artists out there whose work is based on words. For our very first guest, well, if you had a Venn diagram for text-based art and performance art, the intersection in between would be pretty empty, except for one name, Tim Eude. Mr. Eude is based in Los Angeles and is represented by Kristen Tierney Gallery in New York. To paraphrase their overview of Tim, he is a performance and visual artist working in painting, sculpture, and video. His work has been the subject of numerous museum exhibitions, including Contemporary Art Museum of St. Louis, the Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center at Vassar College, Haynes Art Gallery at Wake Forest University, the New Orleans Museum of Art, Monterey Museum of Art, Hemingway Pfeffer Museum, Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, just to name a few. His 100 Novels performance series has taken him from Hollywood Boulevard to Alaska, as well as William Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor's homes and international locales such as London and Venice. His current show, Georgia Retyped, is at Atlantic Contemporary until October 6, 2024. In addition to his paintings, for his 100 Novels series, he uses a typewriter and a single sheet of paper. Well, Tim can explain a little better than I can. And check the link in the description if you'd like to see examples of what we're talking about while we're chatting. Here is my conversation with Tim Eude. So, Tim, it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Ken.
Good to see you. Thank you for doing this. Appreciate you being our first guest. So, your work, you are part of you've been doing the 100 Novels series, and could you tell us a little bit about that process? What is that you're working on?
Sure. So for over 10 years now, I've been engaged in what I call my 100 Novels project. And on the 81st novel at this point, and what that means is I've retyped in each of their entireties, 81 novels, in locations around the world that with each location relating specifically to the novel or to the author or somehow significant to that particular book, and on the same make and model typewriter that the author used. So I only retype books that were typed on a typewriter in the first place. So that gives me a kind of a broad parameter of novels to choose from. And then the other significant aspect of it is that I retype the novel entirely on a single sheet of paper that's backed by a second sheet. And that page keeps going over and over and over again through the typewriter to the point of saturation and then disintegration of in one way or another. And when I'm done, I take the two pages apart in whatever shape they are, and I mount them side by side in a diptych form, and that stands in as the entire novel. So it's a relic of the performance, and it's a piece of art in and of itself.
And I've heard you kind of refer to these as drawings, basically. I mean, it's a really great, kind of exploration of the materiality of that medium, and they almost in a weird way remind me of like like the opposite of Robert Ryman.
Yes, sure,
In
sure.
instead of being all white, they're all black or sometimes red. And your first one was an experiment, wasn't it? You just kind of just for fun, just thought, what
Yes,
happens
I
if I
was
try
sitting in
this?
my studio and I was reading a book, and I noticed or I recognized that what I was looking at on a formal level was a rectangle of black inside of a rectangle of white, and the same, on the other page as I had held the book open, and then I I closed the book and like put it between my hands and palpably like felt like, what if I could crush this and get all the words, like on these two pages. And so,
Squeeze,
yeah,
get a big
right,
vice and
exactly, it
squeeze
was
all the words
exactly
together.
like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
and
yeah.
and I think that's the visual artist in me that wanted to see the book in a very material way. And so then I started to think about, well, how could I do that? Should I do it, write it by hand? I felt like that's kind of been done one way or another. overwriting, and
Yeah.
then I started to think about typewriters, because I've for a long time been interested in authors and authors' houses and literary pilgrimages, and I thought, yeah, well, one of the key artifacts at most authors' houses that of writers that worked in the 20th century is the typewriter. Um, and I thought, okay, well,
Mhm.
I could use a typewriter. In fact, I could use the same make and model typewriter the author used to retype the book that that author wrote. And I settled on Hunter S.
Mhm.
Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, in part because I had recalled that he said in an interview at some point, when he was a young writer, he copied out The Sun Also Rises and The Great Gatsby in their entireties to get inside the writing, kind of like an old master painter. Same idea,
Mhm.
um, but in a Gonzo way,
Oh, sure.
as Hunter S. Thompson would have done it. So that's where I started. I didn't know it was a performance. I didn't go anywhere. I did it in my studio, but I did acquire the an IBM Selectric typewriter, of the same make and
Mhm.
model that he used to write that book on, or at least part of it. And I got something
Mhm.
out of it, and I thought, well, I'm going to do another. And I did two or three in my studio, and then I think it was the fourth or maybe the fifth one. I realized this is a performance. I'm going to do it in a location that
Mhm.
relates to the novel. So I retyped Henry Miller's Tropic of Capricorn on a sidewalk in Brooklyn around the corner from his childhood home, and that was really cool.
Oh, wow.
And then I kept going from there.
Yeah. Nice. How long does one I mean, of course, all the novels are different sizes, but typically, if you averaged it all out, how long would one of them take? And would one drawing take?
Let's call a 300-page novel is a 12 to 14 day undertaking, typing 5 or 6 hours a day, something like
Hmm.
that. Some go faster than others
Okay.
based on how many words are
Mhm.
crammed on the page by that publisher, or the syntax of the
Mhm.
writer. There can be a variety of things. The location itself, yeah, outside versus inside. It's all
Sure.
that. But yeah, something like that. 12 to 14 days for 300 pages.
Yeah. Yeah. Because a lot of times you're in the gallery because you have other work as well that like the Tree of Life series where you have typewriter spools. Or is the actual spool embedded into the picture and then the tape too?
So there's a few series. The Tree of Life series are large oil
Okay.
pastels. So there's no ribbon or spool on those. But the Recognitions
Mm.
series, which maybe you're
Mhm.
thinking of, are um, I use typewriter ribbon that I
Mhm.
embed in oil paint and build up horizontally on the
Mhm.
panel, um, usually with some type of cardboard armature that looks like an oversized spool, and a sort of a trunk of a tree.
There we go.
So no spools, but yes, ribbons.
Very nice. And so you're in amongst those paintings, other of your drawings, the novel series. Do people try to talk to you while you're doing this? Are they?
Yeah. So when I did that first performance in New York, in Brooklyn, the Henry Miller piece, I started with a
Mhm.
little sign on my table, and it said succinctly, "This is what I'm doing, and I'm not going to talk to you, because I'm trying to do it." And like within an
Right. Right.
hour of the performance starting, I took the sign down because I felt like I was missing out on something, like that people did want to talk to me, and they wanted to know what I was doing, and I wanted to know what they wanted to say, and I felt like even though I'm trying to read the book closely, which is the primary undertaking for me, that
Mhm.
I didn't want to foreclose uh, the unexpected necessarily entirely, and people
Yeah.
like to talk about books and anything under the sun, and so I never put that sign back up. I've always made myself
That's good.
available. I don't solicit questions necessarily, but
Mhm.
if somebody
Mhm.
decides to come up, most people are polite, not everyone. um, but
Mhm.
most people will wait till I'm like turning the page or reinserting the paper in the typewriter. Um, Sometimes it takes me being in a location for a week before people start to talk to me, because they've seen me now maybe twice or three times, and they feel like, okay, this guy's around, like I need to know what's happening. So there's a rhythm to it for sure.
Mhm. Oh, sure, sure. Is there a particular place that you were doing this in that's like more meaningful or more memorable, or like like what's the like typing experience that kind of stands out for you?
I've had quite a few really good, experiences where I've been in writers' homes or in locations like the post office downtown for a Bukowski
Mm-hmm.
retyping, Bixby Bridge up in south of Monterey for where I retyped a Kerouac novel, Big Sur, and and I've been
Mm-hmm.
in Italy and in I've been a lot of places. I think that I like least, generally speaking, I like it least when I'm in a formal art setting, in a gallery or a
Mm-hmm.
museum. I'd rather be on a in a location. That's not always possible, and sometimes there are very good reasons for me to be in a museum, to tie it to the work on the wall and to engage the museum audience. And so I'm not unhappy in those places, but it is extra special when in a location that really mattered to that author or that to
Mm-hmm.
the story in that
Mm-hmm.
book.
And you said you use the same make and model. I see. I've heard that you have over 100 typewriters at home. So do you frequently have to go find new type? What's the research like for figuring out, how do you figure out what Faulkner used, or what somebody used for their book?
It's a mixed bag. Some authors like Faulkner were pretty heavily documented photographically during their lives, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of support around him. There's the house down in Oxford, Mississippi, is run, operated, owned, and
Mm-hmm.
operated by Ole Miss, and there's resources behind that. So in his instance, I was able to talk to the chief curator of the Roanoke, which is the house, and confirm which typewriter he used,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I retyped The Sound and the Fury at the house. And so that one, was pretty easy. The Hunter S. Thompson one I started with, that was pretty easy. There are some others though that you have to take more time. You have to give yourself a chance to go. I mean, I've visited archives. I've looked at papers. I've taken copies of papers and shared those with some people who are experts with
Mm-hmm.
typewriters, and they've been able to sort of say, well, these characters look like they came from a royal, or so there's a little bit. Some of them are more
So,
um, involved than others. It
wow.
took me a few years to track down um, uh, um, Ken Kesey's typewriter information, because he was gone. And even though One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a famous book, he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have like the full foundational support that say Faulkner has. But I ultimately
Mm-hmm.
did, learn about his typewriter, and that's a novel that I haven't typed yet, but I am sure I'm going to, at the Kesey
Mm-hmm.
farm in southern Oregon, which is now operated
Mm-hmm.
as a writer and artist retreat by Kesey's granddaughter. So these things. I mean, and I've been working on that for 10 years.
Very
So
cool.
some of them take longer for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, you've got what, 19 novels to go, and this kind of leads into one of my questions I was thinking about. You clearly have that one. Are there other novels you have on the horizon that you are targeting?
I have a. Just having been doing it now for over 10 years, I've accumulated this database of novels that I think were typed or I know were typed, and I've broken it
Mm-hmm.
down by geography, and so that list has got to be 1,000 novels long at this point, and I add to it pretty regularly. So
Yeah.
so I don't necessarily have the final 19 set, but I know like where I would like to go and do a group of novels, and I would probably choose these three or four, those five or six, or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. There's room enough for me to do, you know, four or five more sort of big, um, you know, quote residencies in areas,
Sure.
or maybe it's two and then a bunch of one-offs. It'll depend a little bit on how it comes together. I
Hmm.
get help from my gallery in New York in terms of interactions with museums or artist houses or whatever, and that can dictate how and what gets typed.
Hmm. So you said the final 19. Are you going to stop at 100? Is it a definite cutoff or?
Well, I don't know that it has to be cut off. My guess is it probably will still be part of what I do, but I'm
Hmm.
not necessarily going to be. I mean, I'm not going to say, "Well, I'm going to type to 200." That sounds a little
Hmm.
bit, um, I don't know, not fun or just like not imaginative or something.
Hmm.
I think that if I can land the 100 right, and it gets some kind of museum show,
Hmm.
and I've had a few, so I'm hopeful that somehow
Yeah.
it'll turn into something. Then maybe some opportunities will come out of that. I do like the idea of maybe just being in the studio for a few years after I finish the typing, because it is a pretty draining. I mean, enjoyable, like very
Sure.
rewarding, but still a lot goes into it, And I'm on the
Yeah.
road and away from the house and the family for sometimes, I don't know, 6 8 weeks, and so it
Hmm.
might be, I think, good probably just for my art making to have maybe 2 or 3 years where I'm not out typing and I'm just in the studio, and not planning, because basically by the time if you figure in the planning and the going and then the winding down, if it's a 6 month project every time I
Hmm.
like head out the door to type 3 or 4 novels, and
Hmm.
that can take a lot of energy away from what I'm working on in the studio.
Oh, absolutely. And you try to clump them, like if you're doing, two or three. Like right now, your current show, Atlanta Contemporary, is Georgia retyped, and you have several books there. An American Marriage by Tayari Jones is the last one that
Right.
you just did. So it kind of makes sense for you then to clump two or three in one spot.
Yeah, like when if I have my druthers, I like to go someplace and install myself for a little bit of time and
Hmm.
work on the literature of that area. I find it can be, pretty rewarding because, I mean, you're an artist. You like to get all the way
Sure,
into something
sure.
if you can. And so if I can go someplace and spend 2 or 3 months really just saturating myself in 4 or 5 novels of that area, that's probably my ideal
Mhm.
experience. It's not necessarily the best experience for the people that I leave back in LA, though, so I have to
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
juggle that.
Now, what was it about typewriters that drew you in? I mean, I guess it's just was it just the compressing, or did you have a love of typewriters before?
I mean, we're probably around the same
Yeah,
age.
yeah.
Where I grew up when typewriters were on their way
Mhm.
out and computers went all the way in, and I remember typing term papers in sixth and seventh grade. But then by the time I got to college, it was computers, and so I think that the typewriter just it had some maybe nostalgic
Mhm.
feel for me after I left it behind, because I did enjoy that, and I think as a reader of a lot of 20th century novels, I knew they were typed. Like, On the Road
Sure,
was
sure.
typed by a madman with a scroll and a bunch of amphetamines, and there was something like kind of
Yeah.
crazy and interesting about that. And I think that coupled with having actually typed at the very beginning of my educational life,
Sure.
it stuck with me. And then as I got a little older and went on a few sort of visits to writers' homes and saw those typewriters again, I think they just, as objects, also appealed to me.
Mhm.
They're interesting to look at, the same way a kid today reacts when they see me typing. They're fascinated by the thing.
Oh, yeah.
there's something more exciting about them in my mind than a computer, because they look like they could almost get up and walk away, whereas a computer is just an appliance.
Hmm.
The typewriter has a little bit more of its own free will, I think, and so that's probably the draw.
Yeah, I've heard it said that if there's a war between the generations, all we have to do is use typewriters and rotary phones, and we'll just
Right.
they won't know what hit them. So,
Right.
um, now was this always your plan when you were young? I mean, I see you graduated with a BA in
That's right.
economics. So this does not sound like, 10-year-old Tim was thinking he'd be, retyping
Right.
novels in galleries. What?
Well, my mom was and still is an amateur artist, and she had
Huh.
us immersed in art making before we were even walking. Really, we were strapped in our high chairs and
Mhm.
doing drawings. Um, and
Nice.
my dad's a child psychologist. I mean, he's retired, of course, but I think
Mhm.
between the two of them, there was a lot of interest in art and reading and literature. And even though I I moved away from that, I think in high school, moved away from the idea of taking art classes. And um, when I
Mhm.
was in college, even though I got a BA in economics, I really took a lot more English classes. I did my junior year abroad in Oxford, and almost exclusively took English classes there. So there was this theme of sort of reading throughout my life that never went away, even when I wasn't necessarily thinking
Mhm.
I was going to be a visual artist. And I left when I graduated from Holy Cross. I went to work on Wall Street for a couple of years, and then moved to
Hmm.
LA to make movies. And then found my way in my early 30s back to actually thinking about making visual art. So a circuitous route, not entirely disconnected, I think, from. I mean, the Wall Street thing is a little
Mhm.
bit odd, perhaps, but there are a lot of very well-read people that become investment bankers. It's not in my mind, it's not as far afield as maybe it sounds on paper to have wound up um, where
Mhm.
I am. Although I think from the outside it can be a little bit surprising. But that's true for all of us, right? We
Mm.
see our own continuity.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we contain multitudes, right? Yeah, I saw that you had a quote on your website that said, and this kind of struck me. You said something about the whimsicality of the pilgrimage to the sites where you type, and the seriousness of the retyping create for you a fertile tension in which to perform. It kind of hit me as backwards almost. It seems like the pilgrimage would be more serious, and the retyping of the two might be the more whimsical. What was it about that in particular?
Well,
Was it?
I think that why I would still phrase it the way I did then. For me, I am a serious
Yeah,
reader. That doesn't mean I don't have fun doing it, but I am.
sure.
First and foremost, the project for me is about being a close reader and trying to get everything I can out of that book, and to honor the book, so to speak, and
Hmm.
and to like draw some conclusions about where that book sits in my life. Um, and and I think that that's sort of where the idea of that part of the quote comes from. The whimsicality of the pilgrimage is more of an observation about how we as humans kind of conduct these pilgrimages. And they are I think it became most clear to me when I visited Hemingway's house in Key West, and this was before I had started the project, but not much before, so it informed kind of where I started. There's a If you've ever been to, have you ever been there to Hemingway's house? And
I, you know what? I haven't been to Key West since I was like 9 or 10. So if I was at Hemingway's house,
yeah,
I'm not
right.
sure. I don't
No,
really remember.
I mean,
I know it was like a
yeah,
really
yeah,
long
yeah.
drive to
Right.
get
It
out
is
there,
a long
but
drive.
yeah.
So it's a beautiful house, this oasis. It's on, I
Hmm.
believe, the highest point on Key West, which is not very high at all. But you might remember from your drive, and it's certainly the case. You know, at this point, I guess I was down there 15 years later, but long after you had visited, it's kind of we've done a pretty good job of ruining the Keys, and we've put a highway
Oh,
through it,
sure.
and it's t-shirt shops, and you get down to Key West, and it's a lot of like bars and tchotchke shops, and 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 people go to see the house like it's on the checklist, and they
Hmm.
walk through it, and the key feature of the house is that Hemingway loved cats, and he had a polydactyl cat, um, and almost all the cats, um, is they're descendants um, of that polydactyl cat, um, and so and a polydactyl cat has an extra toe, and so
Okay.
they're all over the house. Like there's a little graveyard for the cats, and they climb on the furniture, and basically most of the people there, what they take away from it is that's cats, and they haven't read Hemingway since they read The Old Man and the Sea in high school, and then they go
Yeah,
down,
yeah.
they get back on the bus, and the bus takes them down the street to Joe's Crab Shack or whatever, and they get drunk, and so to me, like it's a bit of it's a bit
Yeah.
of a joke, and so the pilgrimage itself, um, it it strikes me as like what I really wanted to do, I guess is this is how I would put it, is I wanted to do the pilgrimage but put the work back into what made the pilgrimage worth going on in the
Hmm.
first place. And so that's how I kind of landed on it. Now the whimsicality, I guess, is that I don't necessarily need to go to the place to be a close reader. And so
Sure.
there's this imaginative quality to it. Um, you know,
Hmm.
um, I guess that's the way that
That,
goes.
yeah, that makes more sense now. I mean, you're digging into the reading, and the typing is serious because you're digging into
Yeah.
the reading. Is there are there books that, you clearly have read the books first. Are there books that really surprised you upon a second or maybe even third reading in the midst of the
Oh,
the
yeah.
typing, that like
Yes,
the
for
meanings
sure. I think
changed, or like, oh my god, I didn't
Yeah, I think
realize.
a fairly early on, I guess it's 2015 now, I retyped Walker Percy's novel The Moviegoer in New Orleans as part of
Hmm.
five novels I retyped in conjunction with an exhibition of my work at the New Orleans Museum of Art. And I had read that, that's talked about
Hmm.
as one of New Orleans's or Louisiana's great novels, and I read it, and the first time, and I was a little nonplussed by it, but I saw value in it. Like I just
Hmm.
wasn't sold that it was as good as it had been discussed amongst people, and I was just wondering if it was just sort of boosterism or what was driving that. But then when I read it the second time, like it clicked for me, and I retyped it at a movie theater in New Orleans, one of the last single screen movie theaters in Louisiana called the Prytania, and I typed it in the lobby there, and it was
Hmm.
it's this sort of, it's almost like an anti novel because it deflates the plot at every turn whenever there's this building towards what you think is something's going to happen. It kind of wiggles out of that. And it's really the story of a guy who comes back from the war with shell shock, but it's undiagnosed. We certainly weren't calling it PTSD at the time. And he's trying to come to terms with
Hmm.
his life, the life that he had before, who he might wind up with, and so it's this deep exploration on an existential level of this guy trying to reintegrate into society, not entirely successfully, and where he lands up. And so I got it the
Hmm.
second time. So that was a really uh, key moment for me because it really reaffirmed and reminded me that, like, if I show up and give these novels my best, I'm going to be pretty rewarded throughout the process.
Nice. All right, I have to ask, when you're typing, what do you do about typos?
I just keep going.
Nobody's a perfect typer.
I don't. I don't know either. I don't. I don't. I don't. I just keep going. It doesn't bother me. Yeah.
That's what I figured. No, there's no whiteout
Yeah.
in there.
Right.
Or I guess you get India ink. I guess that would be better. Little paintbrush. Right. Well, Tim, thank you so much for doing this with me. The show at Atlanta Contemporary runs through October 6th, called Georgia Retyped. And thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, it was delightful to talk to you.
And episode number 1 of what I hope to be many is in the books. A big thank you to Tim Yude, of course, and to all of you for finding us and listening. That's it for today on Finding the Words. Talk to you soon.